Hi, this is Alan Young, the Managing Director of Young Careers Limited. I'm joined as always by the Sheriff, and we've been sent some of your questions throughout the week, and we're going to start going through them. So, Michael, what's the first one?
Well, we've actually had quite a lot of people sending in the same or similar question, asking how to deal with it if you're asked where do you see yourself in 5 years' time. So, how do you feel about that question, Alan?
I have to be entirely honest here, I'm not a huge fan of this question as a recruiter. It's not one that I feel gives me a lot of benefit from asking it. Things change a lot in 5 years, and asking where somebody's going to be in 5 years seems inconsequential to me. But I suppose it can depend on the role, but generally I don't see the need for any good or competent recruiter to be asking this question.
I'm going to disagree with you a wee bit here, actually. I think there is maybe some settings or some types of jobs or companies where that type of question does actually have some relevance. If you think maybe of like a small company, small family run business where most of the people that work there have been there for quite a while, they're going to want to know when they've got new applicants to consider if these people are likely to want to be there for the long haul, and if the company is built on that sort of structure of coherence of staff over time, then it's actually probably quite a big thing to them. So how you answer that question could be quite important, and it is quite a useful one for them to ask you.
I suppose my issue with it mainly is that most companies should have the confidence that they'll be able to manage this member of staff or future member of staff well enough that where they're going to be in 5 years will be largely affected by how they manage them, as much as their ability to answer this question by more than likely lying and saying something generic.
True, but I think that's possibly more relevant for a big company. Again, if you think of maybe a reasonably small company where there maybe isn't going to be a massive amount of opportunity for kind of going up the ladder. If you get someone coming in here into an interview who's clearly very ambitious and wants to, in 5 years' time, sees themselves as being really high up in a company, if there isn't really the structure in place for that sort of development within them, then that might not be the best fit between the company and candidate. It is still quite a common question though to ask, regardless of how we feel about it. So, in your experience, how's it usually answered?
I suppose one of the most common ways to answer this question, and I have heard it answered a lot because I did used to ask it back when I first started out recruiting. Perhaps I've seen it in some sort of beginner's guide to recruiting or something like that. But it is a question I asked, and quite often it was answered by, I see myself rapidly progressing through the company. I see myself sort of taking you by storm and work my way up. Generally, the answers all revolve around that person progressing up the company quickly. As someone who probably still asks this question, Michael, what's the worst answer you've heard to this question?
Well, certainly one of the worst answers that I've heard, and it's one that I've heard quite a lot, to be honest, particularly when talking about permanent roles, is for someone to say that they want to do something that's not really related at all to the type of job that they're interviewing for at the time, and then they compound that by then stating that they're going to be going off to university to study after summer. So obviously, one, showing that that line of work isn't really the type of thing that they're that interested in doing, and then two, showing that they're not even going to be there a few months down the line, so that potentially takes them completely out of the equation for even getting the job.
Yeah, applying for like a market manager role or applying for even just customer service advisor role that's permanent. It's saying, say you're in May or April, which quite often happens because you're finished perhaps your year of uni beforehand and you're going back to do something different or continue your course, and then saying that you're off to do a culinary degree isn't really going to endear yourself to an interviewer or an employer.
No, not at all. So what would you say the best way to answer that is then?
I suppose the best way to answer it is to be very realistic about it. You should understand the company you're applying for. As the Sheriff has mentioned, the kind of actually answering this question, whether it's got any value, depends on the size of the company. So the way you answer it will also be affected by the size of the company and the type of role you're going for. If you're going for a role, a very entry level side of things, if you're going for customer service, or if you're going for an office junior, something along those lines, you can't answer this saying you expect to be the CEO of the company in 5 years' time. However, you can say that you're looking to develop your skills, you're looking to learn, you're looking to take on the role, make it your own, and look to begin to advance your career. You don't want to be cocky in this answer, but you don't also want to come across to sound like someone who has no intention of advancing or progressing or really improving yourself in any way.
Yeah, so to sum up, I think for that one, then definitely make sure that you do a wee bit of research on the company. Think about the job and the level of job that you've applied for, what the likelihood of progression is there, and really, I think the key thing: don't say something in your answer there that's going to cut you out of the equation for the job.
Yeah, I agree entirely. That's very much it in a nutshell. So moving on to the next question that we've had by quite a few people. This one comes from Bill in Motherwell, and he's asked how to answer the question, tell me about a time that you've had to hit a target. So let me just ask you, Sheriff, why would you ask this question?
Well, it's quite a common one to get, and I suppose it's really relevant across pretty much every sector as well. KPIs, or key performance indicators, are things that you're seeing as I said there, in every sector. Any kind of job that you do, you're going to have particular duties, roles that you're going to have to fulfil, and from a management perspective, they're always going to look at needing to be able to judge your performance. And
Absolutely, it's becoming more and more necessary for managers to have different ways to measure their staff. As you mentioned, in a range of KPIs, as they call key performance indicators. This obviously changes from sector to sector, and I suppose the way you'd want this question answered might vary depending on the type of role that you were going for.
yeah, I mean, particularly I would say in a sales type position, working to targets in terms of your sales targets is obviously by a mile the most important thing. If you're in a customer service position, for instance, you can have a range of different key performance indicators that are all reasonably equally important in terms of the overall performance that you have there. Whereas in sales, it's really at the end of the day, it comes down to the numbers, and it's how many sales you're getting per day, be that in a call centre doing outbound calls, be it door to door sales when working in a car sales place. It's always just how many sales have you got at the end of the day. Obviously, commission is always going to be a big part of any sales role. So, if we're thinking specifically on sales here, then Alan, what would you say the best way to answer that question would be?
Well, the best way to answer this, if it's a sales question especially, is definitely to try and give an example of a time that you've done it. You have to give an example. Simply stating something generic won't be enough in this case. So, say I was being asked myself, I would give an example regarding warranty sales and how I was able to increase them. I'll give an exact example. I was working for a large catalogue company, and they were tasking me with getting my team at the time to get more and more warranty sales on products. Now, it's not the easiest thing in the world. Most people are very much just brushing you off. So what I had to try and do was to try and find a way to motivate the team to really sell these products, do a little bit of extra in my guys. What I did with them was I actually brought a Wii into the office. I brought a Wii in, and every time they got a sale, they got 15 minutes playing that Wii to set as high a score as they could. I can't even remember what the game was we were trying to do at the time. It might have been the bowling. You had 15 minutes to do it, and at the end of the 2 weeks, the biggest score would win a half-day holiday. Something as simple as that. That allowed our sales to go from about 4% conversion rate in our sales up to 23%. It was quite a jump, all for bringing a little Wii in. And that would be the kind of example an interviewer would be looking for. You want to talk about the situation, how sales had been a bit low. You want to talk about the task at hand, which was to increase them. You want to talk about the actions that you took to increase them. And then you want to talk about the result. And the result should absolutely always be you hitting your target. Obviously, not everyone will have an exact sales example like that. I'm fortunate enough that I have a couple of sales examples from my experience. What do you feel is probably the worst way to answer this question, Sheriff?
Well, it's certainly is one that I have heard quite a bit, and I can, I suppose, understand why some people will say it, and they are just, I suppose, being honest. But I've had quite a lot of people just saying that they've not really worked to targets before, and I suppose, like I said, it's understandable why some people might say that, if these like sales targets the way you have in those kind of roles aren't drummed into you on a daily basis, and it's not something that's always being discussed. But I suppose if you've had any work history at all, you've always had particular things that you've had to do. So while it might not have been as target driven as a kind of outbound sales position or door to door sales position, everyone will have targets in some sense.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's not unique. It's not even unique just to the working world. As many of us go through school, In university, we've all had targets for different things, whether it be a school project or a university deadline. Everyone's got a target example, so this question doesn't even preclude you if you've got no experience. Just simply having life experience itself of some kind of gives you the tools to answer this question and talk about a target that you've been able to meet in your life, talk about something. The worst thing, I suppose, as you've said, Sheriff, is simply saying that you've never had to work to targets.
Yeah, I actually remember being asked that myself the first time I went for a job interview, and I had obviously no work experience before that. So what I did was just used my schoolwork as an example. So you've got different assignments, different due dates. So again, rather than just saying, "Oh, I had targets at school when I had to get assignments in," explaining what the targets were specifically in terms of maybe different dates, needing to prioritise your workload to make sure that you manage to get everything done in time and to a good standard. So again, just trying to bulk up your answer a wee bit the same way as Alan did there, not just saying snippets of overall what your targets were, but trying to be precise, going into detail about your thought processes in terms of how you deal with targets when you're faced with them, how you think about it, how you're able to prioritise your workload to make sure that you get or ideally exceed your targets.
Absolutely, exceeding your targets. If you give an example where you've exceeded your targets, it's always going to help. And this question is, well, what we know in the business as a competency-based question. They're looking for specific competencies. They're looking to see that you're target-driven. They're looking to see that you can work to deadlines and things like that. And it gets me thinking, I went through it there and I didn't really explain it in my answer, is that there's a model called the STAR model. The STAR model, which many of our listeners may have heard of, is actually a way to answer interview questions that are competency-based. It's a simple little acronym. It stands for Situation, Task, Action and Result. So the situation or scenario, as it's sometimes referred to, is simply what's going on. The exact situation, you don't want to leave anything out, you want to explain it in full so the interviewer has a full understanding of what's going on. You've then got the task at hand, and this is what you're going to have to try and achieve. Say it's with a customer or with a company, what you're going to have to achieve, and the action, the A, is what you're going to do about it and what you did do about it, and A is quite simply the result. You want to talk about what happened, why it happened, and how it could have went differently if you hadn't taken the actions. Actually, well, I've got this in my head, I'm just thinking about it. The STAR model is a great way to answer all competency-based questions, as I mentioned. I'm going to put up a short video on the Young Careers website just explaining the STAR model in a little bit more detail. It'll be just a short video. Feel free to check it out, guys. It's at youngcareers.org.
Okay, so our final question that we're going to discuss today comes in from Helen in Glasgow. So she sent us an email saying, "I really hated my last job and left after things got too much for me one day. I've not had another interview yet and I'm worried about what to say if they ask why I left my previous position." So Alan, what would you say the best way to answer that question would be?
Well, I'm not going to promote dishonesty here, but the reality is that we don't have to answer this question entirely honestly. If we can answer it honestly and it have a positive impact on an interview, that's great. But in Helen's situation here, I'd be quite worried about telling my current or future employer that the reason I left my job is it was too much for me. It shows you in a negative light, it shows you with lots of weaknesses.
Yeah, I think one of the things you definitely want to do is come across always positive, always enthusiastic, because that's the type of personality that really any employer is going to be looking for. So it's definitely paint your previous employer in as positive a light as possible.
Yeah, you always want to paint your previous employer in a positive light. You're absolutely right, Sheriff. And the reason for that is that the company that's going to potentially hire you knows at some point you might leave them, and they don't want to think that you go about bad-mouthing your previous employers. It's not professional, it doesn't come across well, and it's not really business etiquette. You should never entirely diss, if you will, your previous employers. You want to keep it positive. And the thing to remember is that legally in the UK, the law has changed. A company now legally cannot give a negative reference about you. A legal reference in the UK will consist of three things: the start date that you had with the company, the end date that you had with the company, that means the date that you left, and the final job title that you held within that company. You might have held 25 different job titles, but the only job title that will show is the final job title. and it's something worth remembering that the law is actually on our side here. We're protected quite a bit from our previous experiences.
Yeah, I mean it's completely understandable that some people are going to have negative experiences through the work. Obviously, not everywhere is a great place to work. Not every boss is particularly good or to work with. So we are going to have people that have left jobs because of negative experiences. I actually know someone who I passed for a telephone interview and got them in. Ended up getting to know them a bit better once they were in the company, and found out at that point that they'd had a really bad experience at a previous place, but they didn't mention that in their interview anywhere in the interview process at all. If they had done, it could have changed my perception of them going through the interview.
Yeah, and I imagine it would do, and that's the thing, and it's one of the reasons I don't like this question as an interviewer at all, is that it doesn't really create a true reflection of someone's ability to do the job they're interviewing for. This is my own dirty experience here, I very much walked away from my roles with a fast food retailer without giving any notice. I basically went in one day, I snapped, I'd absolutely had enough. 2 years working there, burnt fingers, burnt everything actually, the smell of a particular burger sauce through my hair. Generally I'd had enough and I just decided, you know what, uni exams are coming up, I don't need this part-time job anymore. And I just walked out without notice. If an employer knew that going for an accountancy role or going for a recruiter role, it would have negatively affected me and very possibly ended up with me not progressing into the role like I have done in my past. But as I was savvy enough not to mention this, knowing the law, I was protected and I'm able to have quite a fruitful career in a range of ways. And it gets me thinking actually, the law, employment law in this country is just something that people don't know enough about.
And that's something that we can definitely look to cover in more detail in a future podcast. But for this week, that's all we've got time for. So to keep things going, as always, we need your questions.
Yeah, we absolutely do. We need your questions. So one of the ways you can do that is you can contact us directly through our Facebook. You can get us on facebook.com/Young Careers Limited. You can either send us a direct message or you can actually put a post up on our Facebook wall.
Got the Twitter account as well, so you can find us there and send your messages at Young Careers.
Excellent. Another way we can do it is we can actually have our messages through Skype. We're on Skype at Young Careers again. Just give us a call. We'll answer it if we're there, but we'll most likely be out and about. If you can leave us a voicemail message and it's nice and clear, we can actually play it back on the show, which would be great.
You can also email your questions in to youngcareersinfo@gmail.com.
And one of our new ways you can actually get us on Pinterest. We're at Young Careers on Pinterest. You can come and pin a question to our board. We're also on Google+. Our Google Plus page is still progressing, but we are now recognised by Google as a business, so you'll catch us on Google Maps if you search for us.
And finally, you can also use the Contact Us section of the website, so you can find that at www.youngcareers.org.
So, as I mentioned earlier in the cast, we'll be covering the STAR model on our website at youngcareers.org. You'll also be able to see our historic podcasts that are on there. This is only our second episode, but as time goes on, they will grow more and more on there. You can see some other things, some other features that we've got. We've got some products such as CV analysis, CV tutoring, interview tutoring, which are available on both a one-on-one basis or a group basis if you want. Feel free to either order them through our commerce section or you can contact us through the Contact Us section to ask a bit more about it. As the Sheriff mentioned earlier, we will be touching on a bit more of UK employment law and interviewing regulations because it is something that the general public and even interviewers are woefully undereducated in, and we want to share our experience and knowledge with you.
So we hope that that's been helpful to you, and we'll wrap up by wishing Bill and Helen the best of luck for their future interviews.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill and Helen, when you get your future interviews, let us know how you get on. It'd be great to have some feedback. And until next week, have a great one.